At my grandson's baby shower, my daughter made a toast, not to me, but to her stepdad. She said, "This is the man I wish had raised me. He will be the only true granddad of my son." No one realized when I left quietly. What happened next shocked everyone. I will tell you everything. First, let me quickly thank you for your continuous support. This means a lot to us. If you enjoy the stories we share, kindly subscribe to this channel. It will be great if you can leave a comment on which city you are watching from. We might just give you a shout out in our next story. Today's special shout out goes to Julian Daniels from Miami. We are glad you enjoy our stories. Now let's go deeper into the story. My name is Robert, and I've always been the man who said yes before he even understood the question. When my daughter was 6 and told me she wanted to live with her mother, I said yes. When she called me at 3 a.m. in college needing tuition money, I said yes. When she told me she'd rather I didn't come to her wedding because her stepfather was the one giving her away, I said yes. That's who I was, someone who swallowed my pride and let other people's comfort come before my own. I thought that was love. I thought that was family. But at my grandson's baby shower, all those little yes came back to choke me. It was a bright Saturday morning, the kind that always felt too harsh for small, fragile things. I had spent weeks getting the house ready for the baby shower, patching up the garden fence so the kids could play safely, ordering a cake so big it nearly took over the dining room. I kept telling myself I was doing it for her, my daughter, who was finally becoming a mother herself. I thought maybe she'd see all the effort I put in. Maybe she'd look around and realize that her real father was standing right there. But that was a hope I should have buried long ago. When the toast came, I was standing near the kitchen door, one hand resting on the countertop I'd installed when she was 12 and needed a place to do her homework. She raised her glass, her face glowing with the kind of love I always hoped would include me. But she didn't say my name. She didn't even look my way. "This," she said, lifting her glass toward the man standing beside her, her stepfather. "This is the man I wish had raised me. The only true grandfather my son will ever have." I don't know if anyone else noticed how her words twisted the air in that room. I felt it immediately, like a crack in the foundation I'd spent years shoring up. The laughter, the clink of glasses, the music in the background, they all went soft around the edges. My breath caught in my chest, like I'd swallowed something too big to fit. I didn't make a scene. I didn't throw my glass or demand an apology. I just put the plate I was holding back on the table and walked out of the room, each step echoing like a confession. I didn't even realize how much I was shaking until I got to the guest room at the end of the hall. That room used to be hers, filled with stuffed animals and glittery stickers she'd pressed against the windows. I'd kept it for her, even though she never stayed there anymore. I pressed my palm against the door and let the weight of her words settle in. That room, like my heart, was already empty. No one came after me. No one noticed that I'd left. Or maybe they did, but they were too wrapped up in her smile, in the story she wanted them to believe. I sat there in the half-dark, the sound of laughter and toast muffled by the door. And I realized something I hadn't let myself see before. She'd already chosen the man she wanted to call family. She'd already chosen who she wanted to raise her child. And it wasn't me. When the party was over, I went back downstairs. The kitchen was a mess of half-eaten cake and plastic cups. I cleaned it up in silence, the way I'd always cleaned up her messes. But this time, there was no comfort in the ritual. I wasn't doing it for her. I was doing it because I needed to feel like the man of this house one last time. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark, my fingers curled around a pin and a blank eviction notice I'd found in the drawer next to the utility bills. I thought about all the ways I'd given her this house, letting her move in rent-free after the divorce, paying for repairs she never thanked me for, pretending not to notice when her boyfriend would show up at midnight, smelling like stale whiskey and cheap cologne. I thought about how every room in this place had some part of me in it, every nail, every hinge, every coat of paint. I thought about how she'd looked right through me today, like I was nothing. I wrote the notice out carefully, my hand steady in a way my heart wasn't. "You have 30 days to vacate the premises." That's all it said. No anger, no explanation. Just the cold fact of it, the final boundary I should have set years ago. I folded it and slipped it into an envelope. On the outside, I wrote her name and nothing else. "No love, Dad." No apology. When I finished, I put the envelope on the kitchen counter, right next to the baby shower decorations she'd left behind. I wanted her to see it first thing in the morning, when the weight of her words from last night might still be fresh. I wanted her to understand that I'd heard her toast, and that I believed her. I didn't sleep at all that night, but I wasn't tired. I felt a kind of quiet I hadn't felt in years. Not peace, exactly, more like the calm that comes after you finally stop fighting to be seen. When the sun came up, I watched the light creep across the floor, touching the edges of the note I'd left for her. It was the only thing I had left to give. I know now that there are some truths you can't teach someone with words. Some lessons have to be lived, one heartbreak at a time. She would learn what family meant in her own way, and I would learn what it felt like to stop giving away my home, my heart, to someone who never wanted it. The morning after the baby shower, I didn't wait for her to wake up. I knew the sun would be enough of a witness to what I had done. I sat at the kitchen table, an untouched cup of coffee growing cold in front of me. I watched the envelope I'd left there like it was a living thing, like it might open its mouth and start screaming. But it didn't. It just sat there, heavy with everything I hadn't said out loud. I had already spoken my final words with that eviction notice. That was all I needed to say. She came down the stairs around 8, her hair still tangled from sleep, the baby monitor clutched in one hand like a lifeline. She didn't look at me at first. She went straight for the fridge, pulling out milk and bread, moving around me like I wasn't even there. It was only when she saw the envelope that she stopped. Her eyes flickered to mine for the briefest second, and I saw the question there. Are you really doing this? But she didn't ask. She didn't have to. My silence was enough. She opened the envelope slowly, like she was unwrapping something fragile. When she read the words, her face didn't change. She just closed the envelope and set it back down. I thought she might start yelling, might demand an explanation or hurl all the old accusations she kept locked away for moments like this. But she didn't. She just stood there, quiet, the baby monitor still humming softly in her hand. That was the part that cut the deepest. Not the anger, but the quiet. Like she'd been waiting for this, too. I stood up then, feeling every year in my bones. I didn't say a word. I didn't owe her any more explanations. I walked out of the kitchen, down the narrow hallway that led to my workshop. It was a place she'd never bothered with, a cramped room with a battered workbench and a window that overlooked the garden. I'd built that bench years ago, long before she came back home with her stories and her disappointments. It was the only place in the house that still felt like mine. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it, breathing in the sharp scent of sawdust and old wood. My hands were shaking, but I pressed them flat against the workbench until the tremor stopped. I looked at the tools lined up in neat rows, at the half-finished birdhouse I'd been working on when she told me she was pregnant. I remember thinking back then that I wanted to finish it for my grandson, to show him how to build something that would last. But now, the birdhouse felt like another yes I'd spoken too soon. Another piece of me given away before I even realized it. In that quiet room, I thought about all the ways I'd let her take, thinking I was being a good father. All the times I'd let her stay here for free, telling myself it was what family did. I'd watched her fill every corner of this house with her laughter and her chaos, thinking if I gave enough, she'd finally see me as the father she wanted. But standing there in that workshop, I knew the truth. She'd never wanted me to be her father. She'd wanted me to be the man who never said no. The man who cleaned up her messes and kept his voice down when she cut him out of her life, one careless word at a time. I didn't come out of the workshop for hours. I heard her moving around the house, the soft rustle of her packing up the baby's clothes, the low murmur of her voice on the phone. I didn't need to know what she was saying. I'd spent enough years listening to her rewrite every story to make herself the victim. Let her have her version. I was done giving her mine. By the time I came out, the sun was already sinking low, casting long shadows across the living room. She was gone, at least for the moment. A few of the baby's things were still scattered on the couch. Tiny socks, a bib with a cartoon bear on it, the kind of things that always made me ache with a tenderness I didn't know how to show. But I didn't touch them. I let them stay where she'd left them, like ghosts of a family I was finally ready to stop chasing. I didn't call her that night. I didn't ask where she was going or what she would do next. That was her choice to make. My choice was simpler. I was done. Done with the yes that hollowed me out. Done with the hope that if I gave enough, she'd love me the way I wanted to be loved. In the silence of that empty house, I found a kind of peace I'd never known, a quiet that didn't need to be filled. I went to bed early, the sound of the baby monitor still echoing in my head like a heartbeat. I thought about the last thing she said to me before she walked out of the kitchen. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't say thank you. She just said, "Fine." That was her last word to me, short and sharp, like the end of a sentence that never really started. I lay there in the dark, staring up at the ceiling, and let the weight of that final word settle in. Fine. Maybe it was. Maybe it was the only ending we could have. The only way for both of us to finally stop pretending. Because sometimes the only way to find your own peace is to stop waiting for someone else to hand it to you. Sometimes the quiet you choose is the only thing that can save you. I woke up the next morning and the house was still in a way I hadn't felt in years. No baby monitor humming. No footsteps creaking the stairs. No quiet war of words hovering in the air, the way it always had between us. Just me and the walls that had heard every argument and apology that never quite stuck. The quiet felt different this time. It wasn't the kind that pressed down on your chest and made you want to scream. It was clean. Like a fresh cut that didn't bleed because there was nothing left to give. I stood in the middle of the kitchen, looking at the envelope she'd left behind. She hadn't taken it with her. Maybe she thought it was just another empty threat. Maybe she thought I'd change my mind. But I didn't. I picked up the eviction notice and read it again, the cold finality of those words giving me a strength I didn't know I had. 30 days. That was all. After that, this house would be mine again, and she'd have to find somewhere else to build her story. I spent the day cleaning out the rooms she'd filled with her things. The nursery first, small and bright, with curtains she'd picked out in a color she said reminded her of hope. I took down the mobile that hung over the crib, each tiny animal spinning slowly in the air. I wrapped it in tissue paper and put it in a box, not because I wanted to save it, but because I needed to see the space it left behind. Each empty shelf, each cleared drawer was a reminder that I was allowed to take up space in my own home, that I didn't have to keep making room for someone who had never made room for me. As I worked, I found things I hadn't seen in years. Her old report cards, a drawing she'd made in 3rd grade of me with a crown on my head, and the word king written in crooked letters. I'd kept it all, thinking one day she'd want to see how much I'd loved her even when she didn't love me back. But looking at them now, I realized they were just artifacts of a life that didn't exist anymore. A life I'd been trying to keep alive out of habit, not hope. I burned most of it that night in the fireplace. The drawings, the birthday cards, the notes she'd written asking for money and promising to pay me back. Watching them curl into ash felt like breathing for the first time. Like every word she'd said that had made me doubt my worth was finally leaving the house, one crackling ember at a time. I didn't cry. I thought I might. But there were no tears left. Just a cold, clear certainty that this was what freedom looked like. The next morning, I started making lists. What needed fixing, what needed replacing. The leaky faucet in the upstairs bathroom. The cracked window in the guest room. Things I'd let slide because I was always waiting for her to notice. To care. But now I wasn't waiting anymore. I was doing it for me. For the man I'd forgotten how to be while I was too busy trying to be the father she wanted. Or thought she wanted. I spent hours in the workshop, the smell of fresh cut wood filling the air, my hands moving with a purpose I hadn't felt in years. I started small, a new frame for the broken mirror in the hallway. A shelf for the books I never let myself read because there was always something else she needed. Each project felt like a promise to myself. You matter, too. You deserve a home that feels like yours. At night, I'd sit at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, the house quiet around me, and let the silence settle in my bones. I stopped checking my phone, stopped waiting for her to call and say she'd changed her mind, that she was sorry, that she saw me now. I didn't need her words anymore. I didn't need her approval. All I needed was the sound of my own breathing, steady and sure, in a house that finally felt like mine. Sometimes, in those long quiet hours, I'd remember the way she looked at me when she said her toast. Like I was just another piece of furniture in the room, something to be used and forgotten. And I'd let the anger come then, in those moments when no one else could see. Let it burn through me, hot and bright, until it cooled into something sharper, something stronger. Because that anger wasn't just about her, it was about every time I'd let myself be small for someone else's comfort. Every time I told myself that loving her meant disappearing, I stopped disappearing. I stopped saying yes to things that hollowed me out. I started saying yes to myself. Yes to the quiet. Yes to the man I was when no one was watching. Yes to the truth that had been waiting in the dark all along. That I didn't have to keep proving I was enough. I already was. By the end of that week, I felt like I could breathe again. Like the walls of this house weren't pressing in on me anymore. Like I was finally standing on solid ground. I didn't know what would happen next. Didn't know if she'd come back or if she'd find some way to make me the villain in her story. But for the first time in years, I didn't care. I was done playing the part she'd written for me. I was done being the man who said yes to everything but himself. The days rolled by with a steady, silent rhythm. The kind of rhythm I'd never had when she lived here, always pulling at me, always needing something. But now, every tick of the clock felt like a new chance to choose who I was without her. I didn't rush it. I took my time, letting the weight of each moment settle like dust on the windowsills, quiet, steady, and real. I started with the smallest things, the ones I could control. I fixed the broken latch on the garden gate, a job I'd put off for years because she said it wasn't important. I cleared out the clutter in the attic, the boxes of old clothes she'd promised she'd donate but never did. I did it all alone, not because I didn't want help, but because I wanted to see what it felt like to finish something for myself. Each project was another step back to the man I used to be, the man who didn't need anyone's permission to take up space in his own home. I didn't hear from her in those first 2 weeks. No calls, no texts, nothing but the echo of her last word, fine, still hanging in the air like a broken promise. At first, I thought maybe she was waiting for me to cave, to reach out and beg her to stay. But I didn't. I didn't have to. My silence was its own answer. It was a Sunday afternoon when she came back. I was in the garden, pulling weeds that had grown up between the paving stones, the sun warm on my neck. I heard the car door before I saw her, heard the sharp slam that sounded more like an accusation than an arrival. She stood at the end of the path, arms crossed over her chest, eyes narrowed against the sunlight. The same posture she'd had since she was a teenager, convinced the world owed her something just because she wanted it. "Can we talk?" she said, her voice tight, controlled. The kind of voice that used to make me drop everything and listen, ready to fix whatever was broken this time. But I didn't move. I stayed crouched down in the dirt, pulling at a stubborn weed until it came loose in my hand. I looked at her then, really looked at her, and saw the edge of desperation in her eyes. She wasn't here to apologize. She was here to see if there was anything left to take. "Talk about what?" I asked, my voice calm even. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger was loud and hot and messy. This was something else, something cold and clear. "About this," she said, holding up the eviction notice like it was a betrayal instead of the only truth I had left. "You can't be serious. Where am I supposed to go? What about the baby?" I stood up slowly, wiping my hands on my jeans. I didn't look away from her. "You're a mother now," I said quietly. "You'll figure it out." She opened her mouth like she wanted to argue, to drag me back into that old fight where I was always the villain. But she stopped herself. She looked at me and saw that I wasn't that man anymore. I wasn't going to beg her to stay. I wasn't going to let her twist this into something it wasn't. "This house isn't yours," I said. "It never was. I let you stay because I thought that was what a father did. But I was wrong. A father doesn't let his daughter treat him like a stranger in his own home." She flinched at that, her eyes going hard. "You're throwing me out. Your own daughter." "No," I said, my voice quiet. "I'm letting you go." "There's a difference." She didn't say anything then. She just stared at me, her mouth pressed into a thin line. I could see the words she wanted to say, how I was cruel, how I was ungrateful, how I'd ruined everything. But she didn't say them. Maybe she knew I wouldn't listen. Maybe she finally understood that I didn't owe her anything else. I turned back to the garden, my hands finding the next weed to pull. She stood there for a while longer, her shadow falling across the stones. I didn't look up. I didn't need to. I felt her there, the way you can feel a storm in the air even before it breaks. And then, slowly, she turned and walked back to her car. The door slammed again, another punctuation mark in the story we were both done writing. When the car pulled away, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The garden was quiet again, the only sounds the rustle of leaves and the slow, patient song of the wind. I looked around at the work I'd done. The straight lines of the flower beds, the neat rows of stones, and felt a sense of pride I hadn't felt in years. Not because it was perfect, but because it was mine. All of it. I went back inside and washed my hands at the sink, the dirt swirling down the drain. I looked at my reflection in the window, the faint lines around my eyes, the gray in my hair. I looked tired, but not defeated. For the first time in a long time, I looked like a man who had nothing left to prove. I knew she'd be back. Maybe with a lawyer, maybe with tears. But it didn't matter. I wasn't giving her the power to hurt me anymore. I wasn't giving her the power to rewrite this story. The house was mine. The quiet was mine. And I was done letting her take that away from me. She didn't come back for 3 days after that. I spent those days like I was learning how to breathe all over again, one quiet moment at a time. Each morning, I woke up early, the sun creeping across the kitchen floor, and I let the warmth settle into my bones. I made myself breakfast, just enough for one. I fixed the broken cabinet doors she'd been promising to deal with for years. I called an old friend I hadn't seen in months. It was like I was claiming each hour for myself, one careful act at a time. On the 4th day, she came back. Not alone this time. Her stepfather was with her, the man she toasted that day, the man she said she wished had raised her. They stood together on my front porch, framed by the white door I'd painted for her wedding years ago. She looked at me like she was trying to find the right angle to get in, to slip past the boundaries I'd built. He looked at me like he was already sure he'd won. "Robert," he said, his voice calm and polite. "We need to talk." I opened the door, but only halfway. "There's nothing to talk about," I said. My voice was soft, almost gentle. I didn't have to shout to be heard. I didn't have to prove a thing. He stepped forward, trying to catch my eye. "She's your daughter. You can't just throw her out like this." I let out a long, steady breath. "I didn't throw her out," I said. "I gave her a choice. She made it." He shifted then, his eyes narrowing just a fraction. "She's your family," he said. "She has your grandson. Don't you care about that?" For a moment, I almost faltered. The mention of my grandson, the tiny weight of him in the world, my heart twinged. But then I remembered how she'd said he'd never know me as his real grandfather. I remembered how she'd looked through me like I was already gone. And I realized I was done trying to prove myself to people who'd already decided I didn't belong. "I care," I said, my voice even. "But I'm done being the man she calls only when she needs something." She stepped forward then, her eyes bright and hard. "So that's it," she said, her voice trembling. "You're just done? After everything?" I looked at her and saw the girl she used to be, the one who thought I could fix anything, if only I tried hard enough. I saw the woman she'd become, the one who thought I owed her every piece of myself, no matter how much it cost me. I saw it all, and I let it go. I said. "I'm done." The words were soft, but they landed heavy. I watched them sink into the space between us, the final boundary I'd never had the courage to draw before. She didn't say anything after that. She just stood there, her lips pressed tight, her hands twisting around the strap of her purse. Her stepfather put a hand on her shoulder, like he was claiming her for himself, and for a moment I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. The man she wished had raised her, standing beside her like he could erase everything I'd done, everything I'd given. But I didn't laugh. I just closed the door, the soft click of the latch the only sound. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood for a moment, feeling the finality of it in my bones. Outside, I heard them talking in low voices, the murmur of their anger slipping away as they walked back to the car. I didn't watch them leave. I didn't need to. I'd spent too many years watching her go, always hoping she'd turn around. This time, I didn't hope for anything. When the house was quiet again, I walked through each room like I was seeing it for the first time. The worn couch in the living room where I'd read her stories when she was small. The dent in the kitchen table where she'd done her homework, her small fingers tracing the scratches in the wood. Each mark was a memory, but they weren't chains anymore. They were just reminders of who I'd been, and who I wasn't going to be anymore. That night, I sat in the workshop, the lamp casting a warm circle of light over the workbench. I ran my hands over the smooth wood, feeling the weight of the tools, the grain of the unfinished projects waiting for me. I realized then that I wasn't just taking back my house. I was taking back my life, one quiet choice at a time. The next morning, I called the electric company and had the utility switched out of her name. I called the bank and took her off the joint account I'd set up years ago, back when I thought helping her meant tying myself to her choices. Each call was another cut, another release. By the end of the day, I felt lighter than I had in years. I knew there would be fallout. Knew she'd tell anyone who'd listen how cruel I'd been, how I'd turned my back on her when she needed me most. But I didn't care. Let them think what they wanted. I'd lived too long letting her version of the story define who I was. This was my story now. And in my story, I was a man who finally chose himself. I woke up that final morning with the sun on my face and the smallest sense of peace in my chest, like the quiet had finally found a place to settle inside me. The house was still, the way I'd always wanted it to be, the way it hadn't been since she moved back in. I sat at the edge of the bed for a long time, feeling the way the light reached across the floor, warm and soft. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Enough to remind me that I was still here, that I hadn't disappeared just because she couldn't see me. 30 days had come and gone. She didn't come back to collect the last of her things. So I did it for her. I went through every room, every drawer, and pulled out the pieces of her life she'd left behind. Baby blankets folded into tight squares, half-empty bottles of lotion in the bathroom, a chipped mug with "World's Best Mom" scrawled on it in fading letters. I packed it all in boxes and stacked them by the door, each one a quiet testament to the years I'd spent trying to hold us together. A final kindness I didn't know, but gave anyway. When I finished, I sat down at the kitchen table, the same place where I'd once written out that eviction notice. I ran my hand over the worn wood, tracing the small scratches and dents, and I thought about everything that table had seen. Birthday cakes and Sunday breakfasts, quiet dinners and shouted arguments. It was all there in the grain of the wood, the life we'd lived and the life I was finally ready to let go of. I took the last of her keys from the hook by the door, the small jingle of them like a farewell I didn't need to speak out loud. I put them in an envelope, along with a short note. "Your things are here. Come get them when you're ready. Or don't. Either way, I'll be fine." And I meant it. Every word. Because I knew now that my worth didn't live in her approval or in the endless ways I'd tried to earn it. My worth was in the quiet of this house, in the steady breath of a man who finally knew what it meant to stand his ground. When she came to pick up the boxes, I didn't even see her. I left the door unlocked, let her move through the rooms like a ghost, and I stayed outside in the garden. I didn't need to watch her take the last pieces of herself out of my home. I didn't need to see the final act of a story I was already done with. Instead, I watched the bees move through the flowers I'd planted, their patient hum a comfort I didn't have to explain to anyone. I thought about my grandson then, about the life he'd grow into, the family he'd built. Maybe he'd never know me as his grandfather. Maybe he'd never hear my name spoken with warmth or love. And that hurt, in a quiet, final way. But it didn't break me, because I knew I'd tried. I knew I'd given everything I had to give. And in the end, I knew I was enough, even if he never knew my name. When I went back inside, the boxes were gone. The house felt bigger somehow, the air brighter and clearer. I took a long breath, let it fill my lungs, and felt something in me loosen for the first time in years. This was my house again. My home. My story. That night, I sat in the workshop with a new project in front of me, a small cradle I'd started building weeks before, back when I still thought there was a place for me in her world. I ran my fingers over the smooth curve of the wood, and I didn't feel the old ache anymore. I didn't feel like I was building it for someone else. I was building it for me, for the man I was now, the man who knew that love doesn't have to be endless giving. Sometimes love is knowing when to stop, when to let go, when to choose yourself. I finished the cradle with the same care I'd once given to every broken thing she'd brought back to me. And when it was done, I set it in the corner of the workshop, a quiet promise to myself that I was done waiting for someone else to see my worth. I saw it now. In every grain of wood, in every breath of quiet that filled this house, in every heartbeat that said, "You're still here." And that's enough. If this story found its way into your heart, don't leave it here. Subscribe for more stories like this, about love, loss, and finding your own voice in the quiet. See you soon in the next story.